He looked into his brother's eyes and gave the order. No hesitation, no farewell. The guard drew his blade cold and steady. And then, blood splashed across the marble steps. A prince was dead. Not by enemy hands, not for treason, but because his older brother wanted to keep the throne. Just a few years earlier, they had laughed together on the palace steps in Persepolis. They rode horses trained with bows and dreamed of ruling a vast empire side by side. But ancient Iran was no place for brotherly love. It was a land where even blood ties couldn't outrun the thirst for power. Who could do such a thing, and why the older brother Cambyses II was no madman? He was the king of Persia, ruler of one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. And to keep his crown, he made the most chilling decision imaginable. He ordered the murder of his own brother Smerdis. This wasn't just royal murder. This was a crime washed in ceremony, cloaked in absolute power, and whispered about by history for over 2,000 years. If you think this was just another struggle for the throne, wait until you find out what really happened next. The truth is darker than any tragedy recorded in the history books. And if you're drawn to the darkest corners of ancient history, stay right here. Hit subscribe, because our next story takes you into an even more brutal purge under King Darius IV. This is Iran's bloodiest betrayal, and it's only the beginning. In the 6th century BCE, the world trembled beneath the sandals of an empire, unlike any before it, the Achaemenid Empire. From the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of Central Asia, its lands, stretched across 3 continents, held together not by brute force alone, but by strategy, diplomacy, and at times ruthless, calculated violence. This was not yet the empire of Xerxes, the one that would clash with the Greeks in stories of Spartans and Thermopylae. No, this was the reign of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, the very founder of Persia's greatness. And with a father like Cyrus, the weight of legacy was suffocating. Cyrus had conquered Babylon. He had brought down the Median kings. He had reshaped the world's balance of power with swiftness and surprising mercy. But mercy was not inherited. Cambyses II, born into a dynasty forged through war and vision, did not carry his father's sense of justice. He carried something darker, ambition sharpened by paranoia. At the time, Persia was more than a kingdom. It was a breathing system of satrapies, semi-autonomous regions, ruled by local governors who owed loyalty to the king. That structure brought both strength and danger. A strong king could hold them together. A weak one would be devoured by them. Cambyses wasn't weak, not outwardly. He was well-educated, fluent in the traditions of his people, and trained from birth to rule. But beneath the veneer of royal dignity was a man gripped by something far more dangerous than ignorance fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of rivals, fear of losing what his father had built and what he now considered his divine right. The court around him was no haven of peace either. Whispers filled the halls of Susa and Persepolis. Nobles watched each other with smiling suspicion. Advisors bowed low, but their words twisted like blades. Religion, too, played its part. Though Persia was known for its relative tolerance, Zoroastrian priests and mystics still wielded great influence, and any shift in royal favor could turn them from counselors into conspirators. Among all of this intrigue, there was one presence that cast a long shadow: Smerdis, also known as Bardia, the younger brother of Cambyses. Smerdis was no ordinary prince. Some records suggest he was stronger, more charismatic, even more beloved than Cambyses himself. Others claim he was quiet, dutiful, the kind of son who followed the rules and earned quiet respect. But all sources agree on one thing: he was a threat. Not because he plotted rebellion, not because he schemed, but because simply by existing, by sharing royal blood and having the loyalty of key military units, he could be used. And in an empire like Persia, potential was often more dangerous than intent. Cyrus had tried to prevent this. Before his death, he carefully divided the empire's military and political oversight to prevent civil war. But even the greatest of kings cannot control the ambition of the next generation. When Cambyses became king in 530 BCE, the throne was not entirely stable. His father's death was still fresh. Border rebellions simmered. Egypt stood proud and unconquered, defiant to the east. And behind him, always behind him, stood Smerdis, the brother the people admired just a little too much. And so the question was whispered not if, but when Cambyses would strike. What history was about to witness was not just a power shift. It was a descent, a fall from noble lineage into madness cloaked in statecraft. The story of how Cambyses handled his brother would ripple outward through generations of Persian rulers. Some would try to erase the memory. Others would build new lies around it. But the moment was coming fast when Cambyses would make his choice. Not in battle, not in debate. He would make it in secret, in cold blood, and everything after that would be tainted by that act. At first, there was only silence. No shouts of rebellion, no declarations of defiance, just the quiet threat of Smerdis standing, breathing, existing. That was enough. Cambyses II was not a king at war with his people. He was at war with shadows, and in his mind, no shadow loomed larger than that of his brother. The turning point came, not with a sword, but with a whisper. Somewhere between the temples of Babylon and the deserts of Egypt, Cambyses began hearing rumors. Harmless at first, a satrap favored Smerdis, a priest gave offerings in his name, a noble toasted to his health. But then they grew darker murmurs of loyalty, shifting of troops, more eager to follow the younger brother than the king. One story told of a caravan where Smerdis's name drew more cheers than Cambyses's. Another claimed Smerdis had been offered the governorship of Bactria without the king's approval. There is no record of Smerdis openly challenging his brother. None. But in a court where perception often outweighed truth, that hardly mattered. To Cambyses, uncertainty was guilt. Paranoia became policy. And so, in the 6th year of his reign, Cambyses left for Egypt. On the surface, it was a military campaign, Persia's long-awaited invasion of the pharaoh's land. A chance to cement his legacy as a conqueror like his father before him. But beneath the banners and bloodshed, it was also a retreat, a tactical distance. By removing himself from the court, Cambyses believed he could better observe who moved in his absence, and who moved toward Smerdis. Egypt resisted, of course. Cambyses, despite his harshness, was no incompetent general. He crushed opposition with precision, took Memphis, and declared himself pharaoh. But the victories brought him little satisfaction. Back in Persia, Smerdis remained, and Cambyses could not shake the feeling that every triumph abroad was being undone by whispers at home. It was here on the sands of Egypt that something inside the king shifted. We do not know the exact moment the idea was born, whether it came in a dream, a fever, or from the lips of a trusted advisor. But one fact is certain: Cambyses came to believe that as long as Smerdis lived, he could never be safe. And so from hundreds of miles away, he issued the order. The sources are chillingly consistent. Cambyses summoned a man named Prexaspes, one of his most loyal officials, and gave him a simple but unspeakable task: kill the prince. No trial, no arrest, no chance to speak. Just silence, a brother erased. Prexaspes obeyed. Some say Smerdis was lured into the palace gardens and stabbed without warning. Others claim he was drowned in secret and buried in an unmarked grave. One version, perhaps the most haunting, says he was taken on a hunting trip and shot through the heart, not by accident, but with deliberate aim. There was no body, no funeral, no announcement, only absence. And that should have been the end. The threat was gone, the kingdom safe. Cambyses had done the unthinkable, and it had worked. Or so he believed. Because paranoia does not die with its target. In fact, it feeds on silence. Back in Egypt, Cambyses grew more erratic. His cruelty deepened. Some historians describe him as descending into madness. He began accusing nobles of treason without cause. Executions increased. Religious rites were defiled. There are reports, perhaps exaggerated, perhaps not, that he married his own sister, then murdered her when she defied him. He struck sacred statues, desecrated tombs, and claimed divine authority above even the gods. But no matter how loudly he roared, he could not quiet the whispers. And then came the impossible. Smerdis returned. Not literally, not truly, but someone no one knows, who stood before the Persian court, claiming to be the very prince Cambyses had secretly murdered. This Smerdis had the same bearing, the same voice. Some said he even looked strikingly similar. Others whispered he was a priest, a magus trained to impersonate the royal line. But whoever he was, he moved swiftly and carefully. He took the throne. Cambyses, still in Egypt, was stunned. At first he laughed. It had to be a joke. He had ordered Smerdis's death himself. He knew he was dead. But soon the laughter turned to terror. The false Smerdis, whether through careful planning or sheer charisma, won the people's loyalty. His reign began not with blood, but with reform. He reduced taxes. He pardoned debts. He spoke to the soldiers, like one of them, not above them. In a matter of weeks, provinces once on edge swore allegiance to him. Even satraps who had been fiercely loyal to Cambyses began shifting their loyalty. And Cambyses, isolated in Egypt, far from home, surrounded by soldiers whose loyalty now wavered, he began to lose grip not just on power, but on reality. He marched back toward Persia, determined to expose the imposter and reclaim his throne. But fate had one final twist. According to Herodotus, as Cambyses mounted his horse to begin the journey, he accidentally wounded himself in the thigh with his own sword. The wound festered. Some say it was infected. Others suggest he took it as an omen that the gods had turned against him. On the road he grew weaker, fevered, delirious. And then, before he could confront the man, pretending to be his brother, Cambyses died. Just like that, the throne he had killed for the throne, he had betrayed his own blood to protect, passed into the hands of a stranger. But before he died, some say he confessed. That he admitted to the murder, that he tried to warn his court of the impostor, but it was too late. The lie had taken root, the truth had no voice, and Smerdis, or the man claiming to be him, ruled Persia. He had no right to sit on that throne, no bloodline, no blessing, no crown handed down by the gods. But there he was, wrapped in royal silk, seated beneath the eagle of Persia, smiling as if he belonged there. To the people he was Smerdis reborn, the brother wronged and now returned. A gentle king, merciful, kind, far removed from Cambyses' cruelty. They welcomed him. They celebrated. But beneath the cheers and ceremony, something was deeply wrong, because this man wasn't Smerdis. The real Smerdis, son of Cyrus, the great brother to Cambyses II, was dead, buried in silence, killed by royal decree. The man on the throne was Gaumata, a Magian priest, a master of manipulation, a usurper. He had studied Smerdis, learned his speech, his habits, the subtle tilt of his head when addressing soldiers. He had waited for Cambyses to be far, far enough to die. And when Cambyses fell on his own blade, when fever dragged the king to his grave, Gaumata took his place, without shedding a single drop of blood. At first, no one dared question it. Who would the real Smerdis had been gone for months? No one had seen him publicly in that time. Gaumata knew the power of absence. The vacuum he stepped into had already prepared the people to believe even long for a gentler ruler, and he played the part to perfection. But behind palace walls, panic bloomed. Those who had known the real prince, truly known him, began to whisper. His voice was wrong, his gestures stiff, his knowledge of family matters strangely vague. One noble reportedly asked him a question about a boyhood horse. The king smiled, and gave the wrong name. Still fear held their tongues. Gaumata was not alone. The Magi, the powerful priestly class, stood behind him. They swore loyalty and wielded influence in the shadows. And the imposter king wasted no time securing their protection. He dismissed satraps loyal to Cambyses. He ordered the destruction of certain records. He eliminated rival claimants. All in the name of peace. All in the name of Smyrtus. But lies wrought from within. Among the nobility, resistance began to stir. It started with 6 men, then 7. Princes, generals, and one man who would change everything: Darius, a royal cousin, sharp-minded and steel-hearted. Darius had seen through the illusion. He had served under Cambyses. He knew both brothers, and he knew the man on the throne was no son of Cyrus. They met in secret, the 7. In the dead of night, they made their pact. They would not wait for the court to crumble. They would strike first. The plan was madness. The palace was heavily guarded. The Magi had spies in every hall, every market. But the truth, the raw, unbearable truth that Persia had been taken by a lie, burned too hot to ignore. They stormed the palace. It was mid-morning when they broke through the gates. No armies, no banners, just 7 men with blades and righteous fury. Inside, Gaumata's illusion unraveled. There was no royal calm in his eyes, now only terror. He tried to summon his guards, but they had fled. The nobles surged forward, swords drawn. The Magian priest turned king fought back, not with weapons, but with words. He begged, he pleaded. He screamed that he was Smyrtus, that he was the rightful heir. It didn't matter. They dragged him down along with his brother, also a Magian. The imposter king died, not with ceremony, but in chaos. His body was hacked to pieces in the palace chambers. No burial, no mourning, just blood, soaking into marble. Outside, the people waited, confused, hushed, afraid. Then Darius stepped forward. He did not take the throne in silence. He spoke to the people, told them of the deception of the Magian plot, of Cambyses' secret. He did not hide the ugliness. He laid it bare, that the real Smyrtus had been murdered, that the throne had been stolen, that the gods themselves had punished Persia for this lie. The people wept, others cheered. Some simply stared, too stunned to react, because what Darius had revealed was not just the death of a false king, but the truth of a real one. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, had murdered his own brother in secret. He had tried to erase him from memory. And in doing so, he had created the very void that allowed a stranger to seize the empire. Cambyses died, thinking he had secured his rule. Instead, he had damned it. But Darius didn't stop with truth. He ordered a purge. The Magi were hunted down, not just those in the palace, but in the provinces, the temples, the farthest reaches of the empire. They were dragged into public squares, executed, their homes burned, their names stricken from records. It became known as the slaughter of the Magi. And it wasn't just justice. It was a message. Never again would Persia tolerate deception at the throne. Never again would a priest or a brother or a shadow dare to claim what was not earned in bloodline and fire. Darius crowned himself king, not with the blessing of Cyrus, not with the blood of royalty pure, but with the scars of betrayal carved into every wall of the palace. He married into the royal line, claimed legitimacy through force, and built his rule on the ashes of 2 brothers, one real, one false. And what of Smyrtus? He remained nameless in many records, sometimes called Bardia, sometimes erased entirely. Cambyses made sure of that. Even Darius in his official inscriptions wrote of a false Smyrtus more than the real one. But the people never forgot. Not truly. They remembered the prince who vanished, the silence that followed, the lies that filled the void, and the scream of a brother murdered not for treason but for daring to be loved. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was a stain on the throne, a warning that no crown is worth the blood of your own blood. And yet, history would see that warning ignored again, and again, and again. When the blood dried, and the bodies were buried or simply forgotten, what remained was silence. The official record did not weep for Smerdis. No grand tomb, no royal inscription bearing his name, no mourners allowed to grieve in public. Cambyses had not only stolen his brother's life, he had nearly succeeded in stealing his memory. And when Gaumata rose in his name, even that identity was corrupted. For centuries, the real Smerdis was lost in layers of deceit, confusion, and political rewriting. Darius made sure of that. Though Darius I seized the throne with force and legitimacy forged in rebellion, he understood something more enduring than any sword the pen. On a mountainside in Behistun, carved into sheer rock, he inscribed his version of the events in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian for all to see. In that record, Smerdis becomes an illusion, a name claimed by a false prophet, a lie that Darius righteously destroyed. Cambyses' murder of his brother, barely acknowledged. Smerdis himself recast not as a victim, but as the seed of chaos. It worked. The Behistun inscription, still visible today, became the dominant account for millennia. It made Darius look like the savior of the empire, not the beneficiary of its darkest betrayal. The public remembered a false Smerdis. But the real man, the real brother, he dissolved. And yet, in the cracks between the stories, fragments survived. Herodotus, the Greek historian, known for weaving fact with rumor, told a version closer to the truth. In his narrative, Cambyses kills Smerdis out of jealousy and fear. He describes the impostor's rule, the purge, the madness. Though he is writing from far away, and long after the fact, his words carry a haunting consistency. Cambyses had committed a crime, not just against a man, but against memory itself. Over time, scholars began to revisit the tale, separating propaganda from probability. They asked, why was Smerdis never seen in public? Why did Cambyses hide the murder? Why did Darius go to such lengths to erase the full story? The answer, of course, is power. Cambyses could not allow his brother to live, not because he rebelled, but because he might. Darius could not allow the murder to be remembered, because it gave his own rise a blood-stained foundation. And the people they remembered in their own way, in songs, sung in hushed tones, in stories told by firelight, in quiet doubts passed from mother to child, that a prince once lived, that he was kind, that he was betrayed. Some even believed the false Smerdis was the real one, that Cambyses had lied, that Darius had spun the truth for his own gain. And maybe they weren't wrong. In an empire built on conquest and control, who could say what was true when kings could rewrite history in stone? But even lies have limits. Today, when we speak the name Cambyses, it is not in reverence. His victories are remembered but overshadowed by cruelty, by fear, by the unthinkable, and Smerdis. He has no grave that we know of, no great statue, no temple in his honor. But he has something else. He has the weight of silence. He is the ghost that haunts the Achaemenid dynasty, not because of what he did, but because of what was done to him. A man murdered by his own brother, erased by time, but kept alive by the very violence meant to destroy him. His story reminds us of something that echoes far beyond ancient Persia, that sometimes history does not belong to the victors. It belongs to the victims who refuse to vanish, no matter how hard the crown tried to forget. Some betrayals echo for centuries, not because they changed a kingdom, but because they revealed what power truly costs. Cambyses II ruled with fear. Darius ruled with craft. And Smerdis, he ruled nothing. Not a palace, not an army, only memory. But history remembers more than kings. It remembers what they tried to hide. And if you thought this story was horrifying, if a brother's murder and a stolen crown chilled you, just wait until you hear what they did to Roxana, wife of Alexander the Great. Poison, isolation, A child murdered for inheritance. Click now to uncover one of the most heartbreaking royal tragedies ever buried by empire. And don't forget to subscribe, because the bloodlines of history are darker than you think.